You've entered Bookstorm. Your favorite authors are here to dive down deep into their best-selling books. Stay tuned to brave the storm.
Welcome back to Bookstorm Podcast listeners. I'm your co-host, Kristen Civiletto, and we are just thrilled that you're tuning in from 102 countries and territories, all 50 states, and we know why. It is because your favorite authors are here on the show, and today is no exception. We are just so excited to welcome back to the show for a third time New York Times bestselling author, KRISTINA McMORRIS. Welcome, KRISTINA.
Hi, thank you so much for having me back.
We love your writing and we've been tracking your career for many years. But I want to tell our listeners just a little bit about your background in case they don't know, although I don't know how they wouldn't. You have many, many books that are just part of the national culture. We talk about them and everybody knows the book we're talking about. In terms of some of your past writing, you've got 2 novellas and 8 historical novels, including the million-copy bestseller Sold on a Monday, which of course we talked to you about and we thoroughly enjoyed. That book sticks out in my mind among all the books that we read, I have to say. Um, you have had many awards and accolades, including the Rita Award and a Goodreads Choice Award for Best Historical Fiction, but there are many. In fact, the book that we're going to talk about today, I wanted to read because we have a nice little blurb on the back, and it's from one of our other authors that we've had repeatedly on the show, Fiona Davis. She says, "This one is a gripping tale of family, identity, and redemption that I simply couldn't put down." Fiona Davis. That's the caliber of writing that we're talking about here, and I know that our listeners are just thrilled to hear from you about this new book. And I would like to show the cover, and I think you've got a beautiful version of the book as well, The
I
Girls of Good Fortune.
I do. So yeah, this is the finished copy that, oh my gosh, I have to get you and for your daughter. So it's all shiny embossed lettering. This is the deluxe first edition. So it is limited, but this side pages are just, oh my gosh, so beautiful. So they did such a spectacular job with the book. It's gorgeous.
They really did. It kind of hints at the timelessness of what is within those pages. And we don't give away spoilers on this show, but I think as we talk about it today, people will start to understand there's just so much here in terms of richness, of history, of culture, and justice. And I can't wait to dive into all those topics. And just kind of as a side note, you split your time between San Diego and Portland, Oregon, and you're the proud mom of 2 college sons. And I love that they make you laugh on a daily basis, something you noted. I think that is just beautiful.
That is true. Yeah, even from afar. One's at USC and one is at Chapman. They're both super happy. I've got one that's just finishing his freshman year. The other is going to be graduating next year. I have no idea how that happened. And I swear I'm not old enough to have 2 children that are that old. I'm still 29. I don't know how that happened.
Listen, I every year I agree with you on that one. And we know that family is very important to you because you also have work on a collaboration with your sister. She is an artist, Amanda Yoshida, on the book Ellie Mae Dreams Big. And that's really exciting and really a cool
Oh,
thing to be able to say.
that was fun. Yes, she is an artist. So we did a picture book together and toured together. It was very fun too. It's nice to be traveling with someone rather than alone in a hotel room like night after night. So that was a nice perk for sure.
That's pretty awesome. Well, when we talk about this story, The Girls of Good Fortune, again, we're not going to give away any spoilers, but we've got a lot to explore. And this book takes us right back to Oregon in 1888. And I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about what's going on in the story so that our readers will understand, our questions that we talk about.
Yeah, absolutely. So a little bit of the story. The Girls of Good Fortune opens with a woman who is in an underground cell. She has been drugged. She has no idea how she got there. She realizes that she's dressed in disguise, has no idea why. And as she starts to realize that she is in what was known as the Shanghai tunnels in downtown Portland underground, she also starts piecing together her memories and the path that led to her abduction. And in that process, she discovers she's left behind a child in peril. So it's going to take all of her creativity and adaptive skills in order to not only survive herself, but also get back to those she loves. And of course, I'm sure we'll touch upon the fact that why she has adaptive skills, being that she is the daughter of a Chinese immigrant. So she is half Asian like myself, but she is passing as white during a very anti-Chinese time. So as you know from reading it, there are a lot of questions of identity and bloodline and family and what all of that means.
Truly, as a person thinking about our American identity, this is a part of history a lot of people don't know. And so you're kind of shining a light on something that is a part of our history, our legacy, and one that is uncomfortable in some respects.
Yeah, absolutely. I would hope so. I mean, if anybody is fully comfortable with a lot of the things in the story that happened to her, and that is happening to the Chinese immigrants during that time, the anti-Chinese, Exclusion Act, being one of them, where they could not come over and immigrate. So a lot of them had to leave behind family and were not allowed to bring them over with them, et cetera. So there's a lot of laws. There's massacres that happened that really were deliberately tucked away and attempted to be, hidden in history, and documents, as you know, that did not come up out of a safe that we'll talk about too, that weren't discovered in a safe in Oregon until 1995. So I'm
Yeah.
very eager to share some of this history.
Yeah. Yeah, it's incredible. I read your author's note and my jaw was on the floor. Well, playing on the title, I want to ask you about something. It's called The Girls of Good Fortune. And some said that the mothers and daughters in this story were, quote, fortunate, but Celia didn't necessarily wait for good fortune to come her way. It was something that she fought for and she earned it. And more importantly, she paved the way for others. And so I wanted to ask you, do you think that some of the difficulties that she encountered very early in her life prepared her for those future difficulties? Because her mindset was very different.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's no question. I think that's true universally, isn't it? That the hardships that we have, especially in childhood and as we grow into adulthood, are, if it's all just easy street, it would be lovely. And yet it doesn't sort of prepare us for challenges that come later in life. So I think
Yeah.
that there's no question about that with Celia, that her being losing her mother early on, that is not a spoiler, that comes very early in the story. So losing her mother early on, having to kind of forge her own way. And yet she is also, in some ways, I think of her as being worldly, that she's had to become tough very early on in her life. And yet also, she is also still, in the beginning of the story, 19 years old. So she is still naive in a way that maybe today's 19-year-olds aren't quite as naive, but she's in the 1880s. So her bubble is her town, and so she's had to hop around a little bit, but and exposed to more things than a lot of uh, quote unquote kids her age, but really sort of an adult at 19 years old. But I love that. I thought that was an interesting parallel and also a contrast to maybe decisions and things that we would be aware of today of what to do and what not to do that she would not.
Yeah, I kept thinking about that because, she really did have a unique perspective from other people, perhaps during her time. And I kept thinking to myself, how would you develop that if it was not through trial and hopping around, as you said?
Yeah,
Um, yeah,
absolutely.
that's pretty interesting. Well, there's something in this story that spoke to me because we had a character who stood up for what was right. And sometimes it was dangerous. In fact, it might cost a reputation. It could even cost you your life for some of the things that this person stood up against. And I wanted to ask you if you thought that some of the women in the story towards the end were able to take a very strong stand and, stand up to wrongdoing because their ancestors modeled that behavior. And it was very personal to them to see that action.
Yeah, I think that there's a mix of characters that you have with Celia being, like I said, half Chinese. Her dad, in some ways, she watched this amazing man that was lured over to the U.S. They promised it would be called what they nicknamed in Chinese as the Golden Mountain. So it would the streets were paved in gold, and they really needed them for backbreaking labor to help build the Transcontinental Railroad. So but watching the reality of that, but breaking him down and yet also being so strong. So I think you can see the lineage of that passed down through generations. I think there's, a female character that I adore named Letty, who is an Irish woman who has also her own story. And then there's Madame Marie, which, hopefully one of your favorites, because she's definitely one of mine. And having a tough exterior, that she's also a Chinese immigrant who has made her way in very creative ways. And she's a tough one who has this warm heart. And she's the teacher who doesn't give A's, and so when you get one, it really means a lot. And I think each one of these women, to answer your question, I think has a lineage that is passed down, that there's strength in there. And but they also sort of nature versus nurture. And I think there is a strength that they have got passed down through the generations. But also each one of them has really had to face their own set of challenges that nobody before them did. And so that they know of. And so they have to really, kind of find their own personal strength inside in order to overcome the obstacles in front of them.
Yeah, it really underscored the importance of family stories and hearing about what your great grandmother experienced. I mean, it was really important for all of the characters in the story to remember their past and to
Right.
know their past.
For sure. Yeah. And that's why, as you point out, in the epilogue, it does circle back to generations later. And from the prologue to the epilogue are the bookends. And I think what's important with the ancestry and the strength that we find in past generations is the passing down of those stories. And if we don't pass those stories down, even if they're not exactly documented and word for word exactly right, and that is the point of it. That is the art of storytelling and the beauty of passing along these stories through generations that may get a little bit of fiction, a little creativity in there.
Yeah.
And yet the heart of the story and the core of it is what's most important. And that is what is passed down through the generations, and how some of these people then also find strength. Absolutely, you're right.
It's tricky too, because sometimes the younger generations don't appreciate the importance of hearing these stories. But then when they have children, they realize it. And by then, either those stories are gone or haven't been recorded in some fashion. And to me, that's why historical fiction is so important.
For sure. Yeah. And I just lost actually my grandmother she was in her late 90s, just 2 years ago, and she helped inspire my debut novel, Letters from Home, which was, World War II courtship letters that it was based on from her. And her storytelling, even as a kid, I remember, because it was before the internet, it was before the iPhones and, the distraction of so many things now, where there wasn't a lot to do at grandma's house outside of Legos, and making s'mores. And so part of the joy was listening to her stories. And I think I did really get to enjoy that because there wasn't as much distraction back then. And I think that it is so important that we carve out time for that. So I'm so happy that a couple years ago, before she passed away, I started having the boys sit down with me before they went off to college. And we started recording her on video, like a Zoom recording of her just answering questions about her life. And we started asking, about how she grew up and what her first job was and what her first date was. And did she go to prom and all those things? And she came up with such creative, interesting, not creative, but fascinating stories that even I hadn't heard before, and so nonchalant, matter of fact. And they were just wild stories. And you realize that at some point she was a teenager and she was a kid and had incredible things to tell us that nobody, as the greatest generation, they will tell you. You say, Grandma, why didn't you share this before? And so often their answer will be, well, nobody ever asked. And so I think, opening the door with those conversations by asking the questions you wouldn't think of asking and recording them. I cannot tell you and encourage people enough to do something like this with people that they love, especially when they're in older age, because now she passed away just a year or two later. And now we have all those videos, not just written down, but a video of her telling her own story that we can now pass down to my kids' and hopefully, and hopefully beyond that. So it's something that we really value, and I would highly encourage other people to do.
Yeah, that's a wonderful idea. And I think, in my family, I wish I'd done more of that. And it was a little too late, but I did that with one of my grandmothers. And I was thinking, I wish I had done that with all of them because they have such rich stories and they came over from Italy and left a lot of persecution. I have no idea what that was. I just know that it was difficult stuff. But as we face difficult things, we want to see how our ancestors dealt with it. I mean, that's how we learn and mature. So that's pretty cool. Very good advice.
Hmm.
Um, I want to ask you something about the justice aspect of this story because it's very strong here. And, these Chinese immigrants that you had referenced, they experienced very extreme racism, especially during this westward expansion in the United States. And most did not see justice for some of the wrongs that were committed against them, but some did. And I'm not going to give away anything in this story, but I wanted to ask you, do you think that we're overdue for a reckoning, or is it maybe too late?
I think what's really heartening is that there are times in history that we have circled back, especially I would say like in America, which I'm most familiar with because I was born and raised here. And I would say like with the Japanese American internment, with the Women's Army Corps, the WAC, being that they were not recognized, there were injustices faced by both of those groups, especially the Japanese Americans during World War II with internment. Uh, that eventually circled back to having restitution and having just more than anything, I think, announced and recognized that this was wrong and that the Women's Army Corps, was able to be honored, even after they had all, many of them had passed away. And I think that's so important for their families to see that they were recognized and that wrong, as best as possible in the future, was righted. And so I do think those things are really important. I think it's never too late. And so I hope, of course, as a historical fiction author, I really hope that bringing a light to some of these injustices will have people talking about it. And, hopefully then in some way there's a justice that is being done. If people are talking about it still, even if we don't know, and we'll never know who these people were, and saying that was wrong. And this, hopefully the most important thing is that we say this should never happen again.
Yeah.
And that is, of course, the biggest message we can hope to teach through historical fiction, but especially just through history, period.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think that acknowledgement is important, but also the remembering so that we don't repeat that is so important because it may be women in this context, it may be Chinese immigrants here, and it may be somebody else 10, 15 years down the road. But you've got to recognize those patterns as well of hatred and racism. Yeah, very interesting.
We tend
Well,
to just forget history, if we don't know it. So it's all been done before. So hopefully we try to make fewer mistakes moving forward.
that's right. Nothing new under the sun. I really loved the scenes that involved a cultural connection over food. And it was kind of an interesting theme throughout this story because even something as simple as a bun, and it wasn't so simple, became, representative of a culture. It was a symbol of identity, a lifeline, a history. And I was wondering if you could tell the readers a little bit about the importance of those foods in your story.
Sure. I mean, I think we're all familiar with the phrase comfort food. And I think that comfort food to me, is not just about, a food that we're familiar with. It's when we say it feels like home, very often to me, I think that it's not just a house. It is really about the family or the loved ones that we shared it with, the thought that got put into the food and the recipes. One of my favorite things that I value is a self-published, and when I say that, it was Kinko's with spiral binding and a color cover, it was very fancy, of my grandmother's favorite recipes she'd collected and created through decades. And I put them in this self-published book at Kinko's, and it was supposed to be meant as just a Christmas gift for all the grandchildren so that we could all hang on to the recipes she'd passed down. Of course, today now we value that more than ever. And as it turns out, me interviewing her for that cookbook, putting a biographical section about her life, is what brought to light my grandfather's World War II courtship letters that we had no idea she had kept. So the
Wow.
beauty of that connection of the food that she had served us, I mean, she was just a queen in the kitchen. She was Iowa farm girl, everything from scratch. You think you have nothing in your cupboards, and somehow she can just find things and whip up this gourmet meal. And you're like, how did you make that? What were the measurements? And she's like, oh goodness, she called it bagash and bagali, because she just tossed in a little bit of this, a little bit of that. And so you can never fully replicate it. And even if you have the recipes, somehow it is not still quite grandma's, right? Or dad's or mom's or your uncle's or, or your close friend that she just had this special touch that you could never replicate, which is so, so beautiful. So yes, in the story, of course, there is the bao, which is the steamed buns that most people are familiar with. Sometimes, you put custard in it, which, oh my gosh, yum. But also very often, I grew up having barbecue pork stuffed inside, and it's one of my favorite like lunchtime treats. And in the story, as you know, it keeps coming up in the story in that connection to home, the connection to her father. And for me, it just felt very personal with the recipes of my grandmother. So the fact that my kids now will make some of her favorite recipes and have even told me, Mom, I don't know how you do it, but like when you make the carrot souffle or whatever, it is, I've made the same thing, but it's not quite the same. And I love that because part of it is that you just draw them back home just to eat those certain things that they love. And there is something very special about the love that we put into our food. And I think there's a difference of the food when you have a chef, even at a restaurant, that is passionate about the food that they put out there. I think there's something that intangible that you can't put your finger on that is really beautiful about that. So that is the comfort food in the story.
Yeah, I loved it. It kept making me think about being intentional about creating those memories for my own children, because certainly we have our family recipes and things that have been handed down, but I'm the next link in that chain. And so I was thinking to myself, what are the things that somebody will say, oh, that was, grandma's recipe, but I'm the grandma in this story. So that was kind
I
of
know,
interesting
right?
to
We're
think
those
about.
people. Oh goodness, we can't be that old, right?
But it happens so fast. But again, going back to intentionality, what are you doing? You're conveying your culture, your stories, your fortitude, and you've got to be, affirmative about it. Let's sit and talk.
Right.
Let's bake
Yeah.
together.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's so
So,
funny. It's just recently my oldest son, who is a quarter Japanese, then both of them are. They say a quarter ninja when they were kids. They thought that sounded way cooler. And I can't blame them. So what's funny is my youngest, it's amazing, isn't it, how you raise them the same, they're both from the same parents, and yet they can look so different. And my youngest looks much more Asian. He looks like he's half. Or Hapa, as we call it in our family, halfling,
mhm.
like the Hawaiian name for endearing name for half. My oldest doesn't look as Asian. So if he has his glasses on, you really can't tell. And when he takes them off, you can tell that his eyes are shaped more. It has that kind of that Asian look to them, and which he loves. And what he was just mentioning to me the other day, what he was going to say is that he said, Mom, I just, with having a Japanese middle name, and where his brother so easily passed and is understood that he's Japanese, and he feels like sometimes I feel like when I say that I'm Japanese, I feel like I'm an imposter because he's kind of the story of passing as white, like my character. And he said, he said, sometimes I feel weird that, saying I'm Japanese when when they think how much, like what, a 16th, he's like, no, my grandfather's from Japan. Um, and what I had to convey to him along this topic is that I said, well, keep in mind, Tristan, like as far as feeling like an imposter, we kind of half joked, but I said, it's not just, he was saying that, well, I wish if I at least spoke the language that I would have more connection to it. And I said, well, here's the thing. You have so many other things in your life and your behaviors and the things that you love that you take for granted that have been passed down. The fact that you always want to take your shoes off the minute you walk into anybody's home, and it feels weird to walk in somebody's house with shoes on, or that we eat certain foods and snacks and the chocolate pandas or koalas, that the pokey sticks, that all these things that we've been raised with that are just so normal. And I thought, so many cultural behaviors and traditions have been passed down from my dad that you don't even think about because it's normal for us.
Yeah.
And so I said, there's a lot more there that we're just this culmination, conglomeration sort of all these things that generations before us have passed down that we aren't even aware of a lot of the time. And I just think that there's a real beauty in that.
Well, I love that your character wrestled with some of those things in the story, and you see that thematically throughout, which I thought was actually quite beautiful and very heart-wrenching at times. Well, I'm going to show our listeners one more time this beautiful cover. And the Girls of Good Fortune, we encourage you to pick it up and read it, listeners and readers, because it is fantastic. We have always, of course, loved Christina McMorris' writing and her stories. This is a beautiful, beautiful story. So for people who have not read her before, pick it up. Absolutely wonderful. And I want to tell our listeners real quick how to get in touch with you because I know they'll want to check out your website. You have a very beautiful website, KRISTINAMcMorris.com. You're on Facebook, on Instagram. And I just want to thank you because I love when you come on the show. I love talking about the themes in your stories. And we hope that you come back in the future. Do you have anything you want to share that might be coming down the road?
I wish I did. Oh goodness, I'm sure my agent and editor would love if I did. I do have a new story idea, and thank you for saying all of that. My goodness, love being here always. So yes, I have a story idea that I've been wanting to write for years, and ended up set it aside. It was always like, say it's like the eye doctor, one or two, two or one, A or B, and keep going back and forth, and then kind of taking the other one. And so being the World War II story, The Ways We Hide, and then it was the Shanghai tunnels. And now I'm down to the one that I have just been pondering for years. So I will say that it is another West Coast story. And it's a landmark that I cannot wait to write about. And I probably should leave it at that, but I would love always, if the opportunity comes, to circle back and chat with you about it.
We certainly hope so. Well, we wish you all the best with this story. And again, we loved it. We're just encouraging everyone to pick it up. I'm going to show that cover one more time. This is one of those covers that you have to know what the story's about. It is, you can judge this book by this cover.
I agree with that. Yeah.
Well, thank you, Christina. And again, thank you for coming on the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Take care. Well, listeners, that was another fantastic interview with Christina McMorris. We just love when she comes on the show. She's so thoughtful and deep, but her books are wildly entertaining. I mean, that's, of course, why they sell so many copies, because you're learning something. You're immersed in this time period. It's just the very best in historical fiction, and we love when she comes on. And I want to tell our listeners about some other authors that we have coming up. Our summer and fall lineup is incredible. We've got Jessie Rosen with All the Signs, Chanel Cleaton, The Lost Story of Eva Fuentes, Elma Katsu, Fiend, Amy Austen, His Last Mistress, Christina Baker Klein and Ann Burt with Please Don't Lie. They're coming back on. Susan Wiggs, Wayward Girls, coming back on. Adam Plantinga with Hardtown, Chris Pavoni with The Doorman. We have Clements Michelin with Our Last Resort, Adriana Trigiani, The View from Lake Como. We've got Isabella Maldonado and Jeffrey Deaver coming back on the show to talk about The Grave Artist. And we cannot tell you how excited we are about these authors and more that we have coming up. We want you to tune in. You can find us at BOOKSTORMPodcast.com. You can also find us on Facebook, on Instagram. We have a fantastic YouTube. Just search for Bookstorm and podcast. We should come right up, and you can see us and these fantastic authors. And we know why you're tuning in, because they are here, the very best in authors today.